when one is ready to step down. It's what you're building, how you build it, and what you're actually leaving behind. And that gap between the handoff and the legacy is where this conversation lives.
That it's about continuity and succession because they're hand in glove. A business is going to continue. The effort that it took to spin up the business in the first place, or to do a major expansion, or to do an acquisition, is the same kind of energy that it takes to manage one of these kinds of transitions.
Welcome to The Hard Skills. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, and this is the show where I help leaders in high-pressure, expert-driven organizations build the skills that actually move people and systems and create healthier organizations. I came to this as a clinical psychologist turned executive advisor and leadership trainer with a take that sits where culture, politics, interpersonal savvy, and emotional intelligence meet. If you've ever sensed something about your leadership situation was off and couldn't quite name it, and if you want to get better at the human and political realities of the work, you're in the right place. So let's get to it. This spring, Apple announced that Tim Cook would step aside as CEO of Apple in September and become executive chairman, handing the company to John Ternus after what it described as a long, deliberate succession process. Set that next to the messier headlines around poor legacy and future value, like GM walking back their long-term commitments. And you wonder, what is the connection there? Is there a connection? The connection is that succession is only half of it. The harder question isn't who takes the chair when one is ready to step down. It's what you're building, how you build it, and what you're actually leaving behind. And that gap between the handoff and the legacy is where this conversation lives. What are we promising? What are we trading today for tomorrow's future? So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to get into. So I'm excited to have Dr. Mark L. Vincent back on the show to talk this time with me about the Maestro Effect. He's a third-turn architect, as he calls himself, a process consulting pioneer, and a systems convener. And we're going to get into what each of those things means. His new book, which I got, The Maestro Effect, Future Value, Succession, and Legacy in Business. We're going to talk through why he reaches for a word like maestro to speak to the three turns of leadership, what that is, and what that means for younger generations who are going to move through several full careers in one lifetime. This is the close of our season on rediscovering human needs at the workplace, and could be the deepest one, building something that outlasts you. So with that intro in mind, welcome to the show, Mark. Great to have you on.
Well, I'm glad to be with this, and I hope this proves to be a good anchoring conversation to the end of the season.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's get into the Maestro Effect. Actually, before we get into why call it Maestro, let's talk about how did you get interested in succession as kind of an entire body of work and where you are right now?
So I want to add, just as I respond to that, find myself more and more saying that it's about continuity and succession because they're hand in glove. If a business is going to continue, of course, there have to be people that are ready to take it, but there also has to be a business for them to take, processes and equipment and facilities. And so they have to flow together. And quite often in an enterprise, you've got one group of people paying attention on the financial side to the processes in the business and the operations. And then you have talent grading and 9-box exercises and stuff happening often over the C-suite, maybe with a strategic HR leader or whatever else. And the interface between them often doesn't match up. And the result is some successors come in and they're familiar with the profit, they're familiar with the margin, they're familiar with the history, but they haven't really got down into the capital structure of the thing to find out what happens if there's a contingency, an accident, a terrible storm, new set of federal regulations that are coming down the pike that you have to do things off of your balance sheet. So that, just to say that those two things go together. But having said that, you hear me pointing to extra complexity. It's not just about someone stepping out, saying, see you later, getting their watch, and another person slides in behind them. They have a lot. There are many, many more dynamics to that. So I come to it as a process consultant. When you're sitting down in that that style of consulting, you're not pretending to know the answers. And you're sitting with people who are admitting that they don't have the answers. Well, then you can get work done, because if we're pretending that we have knowledge about something we haven't done before, we're just going to make a whole boatload of mistakes. And the future will pay a price for that. So in process consulting, there's just like the highest art form is a moment where you've got a major leadership changing hands. The value that's already in play, the value you're seeking to get, is all at stake. There's nothing like money to bring out dysfunction in any system. So as I've done more and more of this work across the years, this just became a place where good work got done. And I found I had some aptitude for it, because I wasn't coming in with a rubber stamp or a form that just do this and it will all be well. But I feel like this is a spot where everybody admits we have to figure it out for us. Let's get started.
Yeah, there's a lot in what you just shared. What I'm pulling out, a couple of things that I'd like to dig into. One is the part about continuity and succession, not just being about the movement from a set of people in a set of seats, but also everything about the business and its value, and finding ways to not lose all the value that's been built up as a result. And then the second piece is how you engage to make that conversation happen through a much more complex conversation rather than a static set of checkbox criteria. So I would love to sort of like hear more about what you see as the pitfalls of the sort of more common checkbox criteria move seats versus what you're sharing about the level of complexity when you're trying to maintain value during this kind of complex change, and how you get at that.
Yeah. So optimally, a company that's mature in all of its processes and has been developing a bench and good continuity and succession planning all along, not to the point that every position has a successor ready to step in, but you know very well that if someone is hit by a bus in that figurative or literal sense, someone can step in and take over, even if it's for an interim or whatever. So there's no loss of continuity. I mean, a really mature business is figuring that out. Well, most businesses are not mature businesses. Most enterprises and nonprofits are not there yet. And for many of them, they feel like it's a perk. When we've got other stuff figured out, when we have extra cash, when we don't have these other pressing matters, we'll get to that. So for many, at these moments where they're making a transition from a clinical, kind of a detached, consultative lens, someone like me is actually helping them reduce the loss rather than seize the gain. When they are more mature or enough to say, 3 or 4 years down the road, there's going to be a major change, a retirement, or there's a new set of services coming online. I'm not the right person to lead this, or my successor that we've been grooming is ready. Let's put them in. It's the right time. When you've got that kind of work going, you actually have a potential to avoid the two ditches on the road. The ditch on the left is transactional. I'm out. I'm getting all that's coming to me. Where's my golden parachute? Next sucker can take it over. Call me on the golf course kind of thing. And the one on the right side of the road is the hovering. I can't let go. I can't let go. I don't trust you. I don't trust you. And the great heart embrace of the business all these years is now a chokehold. And they're choking the life out of everybody. And that's the last chapter. And that's what everybody remembers. You get these stories like they never left, or they were a great boss until the end. That kind of thing is what's then talked about. We don't want either of those stories, but the majority of them land in some derivation of one of those two ditches. To be deliberate and to be planful, you get started yesterday. You like, now's the right time. Let's start thinking longer term. Let's start laying out a roadmap. And we discover that the effort that it took to spin up the business in the first place, or to do a major expansion, or to do an acquisition, is the same kind of energy that it takes to manage one of these kinds of transitions. It's not just what does the consultant cost us or what's the new salary going to cost us. If you're going to be handing off things like major accounts, well, then you're going to have an increased travel budget because somebody's got to make the introductions. People are going to have to go alongside things for a while. You're going to have some doubled up salary for a while. And for many businesses, they don't have that in their budget. They don't have that kind of margin. So they have to plan for it, or they have to actually do it as a capital play, just like if they're building a new building. They're taking it off their balance sheet because it's like a reconditioning then at that point. So that's that subtle navigation between that. And without that perspective, it's going to veer off into one of those ditches in almost every case.
I wonder if there's a third ditch here. And maybe it fits under either one. So I'm curious to hear what you say. But, sometimes when you think about succession planning with people who just want to retire to a slower pace and not deal with all of, the demands of the work world, especially, owning a company and everything that comes with it. I wonder about the people who want to move out of it, who are just plain tired and want to hand it off. And when you describe how in reality, what it takes to do good succession planning is the same level of effort and involvement and engagement that it took to start up in the early stages, I keep thinking, what about the people who are just tired and don't want to do that and then don't realize that they actually have to put forth way more effort than they're willing or interested in? Could that be a third rail?
I'm really glad you brought this up. So let's say I'm not trying to argue for the metaphor, please plead me, but if we leave the two glitches where they are, you can see someone saying, I'm tired, I just went out of here, you all have to deal with it. And you also have what started probably months ago, I'm tired, I'm not letting on, I've got to hold on until I get my full retirement, and it just drains the life and nobody has the courage to name what's happening. When we see the kind of scenario that you're talking about, normally there are two approaches that is different. It's not the ditches, but it's not the same as we're going to hand this over in a deliberate way to a successor. This could lead then into, hey, we're tired, I don't have a successor, I want my employees to have continued work and we have a good thing here, but I can't lead it anymore. Well, then you look at a sale or an event, and then you're in a position, if things are going pretty well, to actually, instead of lining up for the cattle call and say, how much will you give us? To be able to say, we were looking for a good investor, or we're looking for a merger of some kind. But if we don't find one, we're going to go to the second scenario that I'm about to describe. But in this one, if you can match our values and you're willing to hold on to this a long term, you'll give us some guarantees or whatever else to show that this good mission can continue, we can explore that. And there are good guides who will come alongside to help make that happen. If not, then you look at an interim. Who's someone who's fractional or full-time, but they're not looking for a full-time gig. They love to take this moment, be in for 3 to 5 years, really get it set up to hand to a successor, which means then you can get a better board in place if you don't really have one yet. Or if you do have a board, you can walk with them, work with them to be very clear about the kind of leader that's going to be needed, because you've already replaced the previous leader. You have this interim who is helping to set the stage to go forward. So you actually have several ways that you can navigate through that, because quite often you have sudden events. I mean, someone, is there and then the next day they're not. And then, what do you do? And so to have that kind of a plan in place is also a possibility.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So then, we started by kind of sharing some examples, Apple, GM. I would love to hear kind of like where you would place those scenarios into kind of how you think about situations that were very well thought out and successful and why, versus situations, whether it's your clients or, GM's example or your other personal examples where it was not thought through and it fell apart or something went wrong or the company didn't even really care about the kinds of things that you're talking about and kind of what happens in those situations?
It's one of the funny things about this is, the book, The Maestro Effect, which has just come out. In it, we talk about Apple a little bit because at that point, everybody's wondering, well, who will Tim Cook name as successor? Probably the most successful successor in American business history.
Yeah.
And this isn't family, second generation, a third generation. It's this person appoints this person. Who's Tim going to name? How's that going to go? And here it's happened. He's named someone. And you can read this anywhere. Well, what's that going to be like? What's that going to mean? We don't know yet. So the actual success of the succession plan is in the successor's hands over time. And it is something that Tim Cook won't be able to completely control. The successor won't be able to completely control, but it's going to be how the story plays out. And it's looking very good at the moment. Like it's going to be done very smoothly and as a class act. And let's just hope that that can continue. Many people's jobs depend on it. A lot of people have their wealth tied up in that stock price. I actually have some positive perspective on what they've been doing in relationship to AI, not being the first mover, not rushing to crush all of the share price for their own benefit, but making sure that their values of privacy and all of that are going to go forward as they put more of this in play. GM seems to have taken, and I'm no insider to this, but they seem to have taken almost an opposite thing. I mean, like 5 years ago, I was so cheering for them. We're going to be all electric. We're going to make highways safer. We got to go by 2035. We're going to do this. Enters the Trump administration, and we're changing all of what the federal government will provide and what the things are that we're going to support. And we need to get back to coal and fossil fuels and all. And they pivoted back to, can't do it. It's not tenable. So the verve that it takes to figure it out and move forward toward what it is that you're promising, they pivoted. And so I just kind of look at those as two stories that are living differently, because if I go back to GM 5 years ago, it was very clear 2035 and it's 2020. Almost all of those board members, almost all of those executives won't be in those seats in 15 years. It's all about continuity and succession. Well, claimed it back. And so people who are waiting in the wings to lead, what are they going to lead? For what vision? To what end? Maybe they'll figure some stuff out yet, but they are very different stories.
I wonder, some people might wonder, is continuity and long-term succession a viable reality in today's fast-paced, constantly changing world?
I love that question. Because we're right into change is normal, change is constant. Continuity means constantly adjusting, constantly doing a feed-forward feedback loop and reflecting and then adjusting and going forward and doing your A/B tests and try. That's that in between what's next, the future, and the current value that helps drive our experiments and our try and our ability to walk around and notice things. That's continuity. I can use the illustration of my body. When I'm 20 years old, I have a full head of hair, almost a mullet. I did not have one, but almost. I didn't have any white hair at all. I was still playing soccer at the collegiate level. And so, the fittest I ever was in my life and all that. Well, continuity isn't maintaining that. Continuity is continuing to live in each of these ages. Now at a point where my hair is white and I am bald and I have 7 beloved grandchildren, where my family energy goes more in that direction than it does to going to my grandparents' house because they're no longer alive. So continuity is that continuing on. And if we're talking about preservation, I like that kind of question. Like, we want to keep what we have. The old adage for that is, okay, so you've painted a beautiful, gleaming white fence post in the sunshine in the summer. If you want it to stay exactly the same, you have to change it every couple of years. You got to go out there, scrape the paint off, and paint it again to keep it as you want it. So that the change just never ceases.
That's interesting because, we're in an era where people want to, quote unquote, make America great again. But the message behind it is go back to something in the past that feels stable, right? It's really out of like the fear and discomfort of change. But what you're saying is, in fact, to keep things great, we really need to keep working at it in a constant state of evaluation, adjustment, adaptability in order to, continue and like accept reality too of where we are, but with a vision towards something that is important to you, right?
Yeah. Coupled with it is the readiness to take responsibility to engage that way. And a big concern that we have in developing, like noticing and calling out the gifts of people who are capable of complex thinking, of being able to do complex problem solving, using the executive function of their brain for the executive role that they carry. The abilities are there, but it's harder to find people because they're not being grown up, mentored, cultivated that way. They're
Hmm.
operating cylinders, single profession. And the first instinct often is, well, why didn't somebody tell me? Why didn't somebody give me that? The software doesn't do this for me. I run this software, not that software. And so they're down in these channels, and you can watch people at all walks of life, all ages. It's just not respective of gender, sexuality, or anything, but they'll actually just kind of shut down. You almost want sometimes to say, that's another zombie, because they can't cognate complex stuff because it's never been the major diet of their life. Well, to be able to run organizations and live in this kind of VUCA world and all that, it is a very special gifting that any of us can cultivate, to be able to think across and down and make associations and do connective things and gather with people and wrestle with things. Can't do it when our faces are glued to a screen or when we're only doing a single channel piece. But that has to go with this in order to be able to embrace the world as it is, instead of wishing it could be what it never really was in the first place, or going forward to a nirvana that you actually aren't building with others.
Yeah. I suspect now is a good time to ask you then, what is a maestro level leader? Why did you call it that?
Yeah. So this type of leadership understands what it means to orchestrate something. And so right there, you're into like a musical kind of connotation where you're seeing the parts and you're looking forward, you're seeing where they have to come together and what could be as they develop. And you're still ready to make adjustments as you learn, as you rehearse, and as you try. And this level of leadership has to have enough altitude to be able to see forward and to the side and to see depth. I'm going to take just a little sidebar to point out that when I'm working with these leaders, we often have to talk about the fact that just because they can see further, faster, and wider than most of the people around them doesn't mean they see everything. They still have blinders too. And there are people around them that are here and noticing things this person needs to know, but they're moving so fast. They're not stopping to say, is there anything else that you see, even if it's a small detail? And then they're frustrated, like nobody can do this stuff. Well, they'd like to help, but you're moving so fast and so thoroughly, and you're talking in shorthand as you're making stuff happen. But once they begin to really be able to work with their team and have a little bit more patience to draw people out, a person like this then is able to start composing a possible future and inviting the gifts of the people. And so they start pulling that together. And so if we use the orchestra as an example for this, the soloist would be more like a person in their first turn. They're learning what they can do. They're good at their skill. They can play their instrument. They're a master of it. As they get better, they might even be able to take on students and show that talent and pass that along. But they're essentially in this one spot. They may have other abilities, but this is what they are. They're a violinist, they're a violist, they're a cellist, they're a percussionist. That's what they do. They follow the orchestration as it was written. When you start moving toward being first chair or moving towards being a conductor, you are certainly a spot where you are leading that part of the organization, and you are leading still yourself. You got to keep growing your skill. But now, will the people follow me? Will they march to what I'm drum or bow their instrument, according to what the timing is called for? At conductor level, sometimes that person is called a maestro because they are thinking about the whole orchestration. One level deeper of a maestro is the composer, who is composing with that orchestra in mind, with that conductor in mind, the hall it's going to be performed in, the moment that has led to this work being commissioned. They're bringing that all together, and they're able to imagine it before it's even happened. That kind of work makes for a very special leader, to be able to call out all of those gifts and to bring something together that's beautiful. And we have products in our lives like an iPhone or an automobile or living in a house where there's air conditioning that, shows the beauty of something being seen by someone coming into reality and bringing good to the world, not just harm. And that's why that metaphor, to be able to evoke that highest form of complexity for the good of the world and to bring something good out of that.
What I'm hearing is like there's an art and science to leadership.
Yes,
You're
clearly
describing the art side, but you mentioned there is some leadership theories behind the science of all of this. I'm curious kind of what you're pulling from.
Yeah. So I actually was privileged to teach and write some courses, but then to teach some executives. It was an executive level, like an EMBA type school. We're looking at what are the leadership theories and how do you choose? And the operating assumption is you have one. It's either a real mess because you've never articulated it, or there's one you're drawing on, even if you don't know where it came from. Let's surface this so you can be more articulate about it, which actually means you'll be a better communicator. People will know what you want because you know what you want and you know where it comes from. And there's some really fun exercises to bring that out. One I love, and we use it in Maestro level leaders, these cohorts tied to what we're describing in that book, The Maestro Effect. But we will say, all right, let's collect 10 statements that people in your family and at your workplace would say, you always say that. All right, so now we identify what some of those are. There's a great laughter, and it's a fun exercise to do with people. We get the back end, you say, now, where did that story come from? Where did that line come from? What brought that about where it made it important to you that it just leaks out of you whenever you get a little bit of pressure and you say, stitch in time saves 9, or whatever it is that you say. As those stories come out, you can get to the principles and you start to at least get an outline of what they're drawing on. For myself, and out of the work I've done academically and all, where you have to study this stuff and write about it and make your own choices, I found myself really drawing on two streams. There is transformational leadership. Transformational leadership often is referring to behaviors that a leader engages because they work. They're practical and they work. You might be an absolute bastard, but you act with kindness because it'll motivate your employees more. So you fake it in a sense, but you do it because it works. And they work. They do. It's effective. And then you have the servant leadership stream, which is a lot about the person's character, demeanor, how they treat others, how they see their place in the organization. And so when you bring that one forward, you can run into a problem of I'm nice all the time, that I may not be clear. I may not be as directive as is needed. I may not call out dysfunctional behavior as quickly as is needed because I'm not bringing the carrots. I'm just offering a shoulder. So when you bring these two together, you end up with something that has been written about more lately, but actually has a deeper root still, and that's steward leadership. Because in steward leadership, you're a particular kind of servant. You are not just serving the people, you're serving the ownership, the mission, the charter of the business. So you want to be servant hearted, but at the end of the day, the chief level of service is back to the reason why this business even exists. And that's where your accountability lies collectively. So you're serving that whole system, and you're bringing these very practical ways of behaving because they work in the utilitarian into that mix. So sure, I'll serve you as my colleague on behalf of why we even exist. And sure, we're going to do these great things that help you know what we're after and lay a project out and give the compensation you need, because we're here to actually carry the business out. And so it's those two streams merged together. There's some good writing on it. The British business community has written a little bit more about steward leadership, I found, than here in the States. But there's even some places here that have done that. And there are some people of faith who have also been writing about steward leadership, where they would say, well, the big steward up in the sky, that's, who I'm serving. And so at the end of the day, I have to be accountable before my maker. So I better be, servant hearted as I do this work. So there's a faith overlay for some as they talk about that theory.
Yeah, I really appreciate you outlining that. And what's resonating for me is, especially with transformational leadership and servant leadership, you can lose yourself in the relationship. And, one of the things that I talked with another guest about, Candace Shooter, who talked about like the potential slide for some mission-driven organizations into cult-like behaviors, is even with transformational leadership, you can have these sort of like larger than life leaders who are inspirational and who use the relationship for the wrong means, right? And at the same time, we didn't talk about servant leadership, but it's the same sort of idea that like you're supporting people, but what is the purpose? What is behind the relationally oriented type of leadership style? The way that you describe the stewardship leadership style is you're stewarding some vision, some purpose, and that is always behind the engagement. It's not just about the relationship. It's not just about enhancing, somebody's strengths. There's kind of a purpose to it. And so I'm curious how then you connect that to kind of the way you imagine continuity and succession planning, and what is required of Maestro level leaders to be able to do that using that kind of leadership style.
Yeah, that's a great follow-on question. Let's start with the fact that when you're talking about leadership theories gather information and data, and then you revisit them, and then you advance the idea further, and then you do it again, and then you advance it further. So the idea of steward leadership, especially more recently, is like, well, hey, here's kind of, again, we're back to ditches, a ditch that you can drive into if you are taking transformational leadership all the way to the edge. And here's another ditch you can fly to if you're just following people around saying, whatever you want to do, I am supposed to support you. Those are both problematic. So what mitigates that? And you end up with this synthesis of the two, where behaviors and standing and posture and character go together. I expect before I'm done in my career, there'll be some other kind of pushing on in a deeper and better, maybe even more beautiful way to talk about this. So as we take steward leadership and move that forward, it would really start with, okay, if I'm now in the chief seat of an organization, nonprofit, for-profit, whatever it might be, I've been handed a charge. I am responsible to steward that charge and do it in such a way that when I hand it off, there is more done, more of the mission achieved, and it's done in a way that another person can pick that up. I love the phrase, get slingshotted into the future, rather than have to overcome obstacles that I left in their wake that they've got to clamber around before they can ever do anything more. So I'm receiving a treasure, not something I've earned, not something I deserve, not something that I now can have. I almost said, I guess I'll say it, a gilded office. I'm receiving this thing. I am responsible for its welfare and all who touch it. And that's going to influence the questions I ask along the way, how we determine success, how we galvanize around our effort together. And there may be things that we have to change. There will be things we have to change along the way, but it's all toward being able to do more of the reason we exist, to really honor our charter. And I've got to hand it to someone, or it will end with me, and I will not have been a steward of this thing. And so you're coming into it standing on shoulders that you can name, looking for the shoulders that will stand, the feet that will stand on your shoulders, who would then be able to name you. So you come at it, and it's coming through in everything I'm saying, with this sense of beauty. So art, not pure transactional functionality. That's not inspiring. That's slave whip cracking, do what I tell you to do it now or you're fired, buddy, kind of boss work. And that brings things down. That holds people down. They will cheer when you leave rather than bless you and bless the effort. And actually, truthfully, there'll be people saying, oh, what a great gift I've been giving, who will never know your name because they're 1 or 2 generations after you were leaving. And so that's, to me, is an inspiring approach and one I want to associate with.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in your book, you describe 3 turns. Maestro level is the 3rd turn, and 4 key elements of a good succession story. Let's start with the 3 turns, and especially in the context of how they might look like for the younger generations that might experience multiple careers all within one lifetime. What turns do they go through as they move from one career to the next, and as they pass on that legacy, maybe, more than once?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's entirely possible someone might live through several cycles, and it doesn't mean that they regress back to, being 10 years old and then grow up again, but they might move into something else and have to go through a period of proving themselves and then being asked to lead. But let's start with this, because I think it's sometimes a misnomer when we talk about the 3 turns. The 3 turns are not something that a person should do or must do to be fully human or something. These are ways that we talk about how one lives through their career, and only a few people will live through all 3 of these turns in one organization, or a long time in one organization, where they will be able to actually engineer or be the maestro for a handoff that others will take. The last study I saw on this, it was about like 86 out of 100, their whole career will be in first turn. Different careers, trying this, trying that, doing this. They're not wanting to lead an organization. They're just really good at what they do. They're maybe artisanal in their work. They're great with the tool and die. They're great at designing and helping to implement, a great landscaping architecture, but they're frontline interacting with people, making the magic happen for whatever the business is that they're connected to.
Is it similar to individual contributor, or are there
Yes.
differences between how you see it?
No, it's very similar to individual contributor. But even as I say that, I want to say that such a person might actually be growing in leadership as a family member, where they've got children in their charge, or they're doing something in a civic club or a neighborhood, or tied to something that where they find their identity and they're helping that organization move forward. They might work for a living in order to be able to bring that kind of leadership here. And maybe because they've given themselves to the association of beekeepers or whatever it might be, at the end of that time, this is where the succession might happen in their life. So we can have these things kind of scattered. What we're talking about is what happens when a person has this big body of work and responsibilities, and now they are able to extend it if they bring their highest form of leadership gifts to bear at the right moment. But for the rest of us, the most of us, first turn, we're figuring ourselves out, what our skills are. Can I lead? Would people want to follow? Am I good with projects? Am I best on my own? That didn't work. I'm going to try this over here. And it's roughly the first third of a career until we kind of land somewhere. And I have a daughter who went through teaching, went through school administration. She is the happiest she's ever been being a caregiver for a hospice. It's not what she trained for. It's not what she planned for. She, in the middle 30s, landed. I just thrill at her happiness, at what she's able to do and the meaning that she brings to people's lives at a very precious time for that family that surrounds this loved one who's dying. So that's first turn. And there's a way to have a meaningful and productive and beautiful life. Second turn is when people are saying, can you take this on? Can you lead this? Can you take, the charge, the stewardship of this organization where you're now responsible for it and its people, bringing your own, ongoing development in play? A third turn starts to happen. Well, let me back up and say a lot of people in that second turn, they'll do this and, hey, I'm really good at helping an organization grow from 5 to 10 million, get past this threshold of what we provide for HR. I enjoy doing that. I'm going to go do it over here now. And then I'm going to do it over there now. And they might be following in the same industry around, but doing this thing that they're specialized in. But there then, in the third turn, you've got this person that they've grown it, they've adjusted, the organization's adjusted. They probably are now offering different products and services than they were 20 years ago. In all likelihood, they have an entirely different business model. And let's just take Apple again, personal computers, to music in your ears, to the phone. And now a question that we're all asking, okay, well, what next? What's that going to look like? They keep morphing. That's why they're still in the Fortune Top 25. And in a leader's life like that handoff isn't for just managing what's now. It's managing for what's coming, what's not fully yet rendered. And that likely means you're not just hiring your replacement. You are hiring the next leader who will be doing what you could not and did not do. And some of your roles, if you advance an organization, are actually going to spread out to others who are the. So I rarely meet a predecessor like this in the third turn who's just giving it to one person. It is often a blow up of their role, identifying the leader who's going to be taking it from here. And some of the aspects that they've embodied are flowing to other people, some senior vice presidents or a head of a laboratory or whatever it was that they carried.
Yeah, I think what I'm hearing is the first turn feels like someone who loves developing their craft. And that craft over time, as they develop it, influences other people. But it doesn't have to involve an entire people management, organizational management, all of that. It could, but it doesn't have to. And it is just sort of like digging into that. It could be a technical skill. It could be another craft, right? It could be, the hospice work, like you mentioned of your daughter. And then, the second turn is, how do I help others develop their craft to meet sort of like a shared mission, right? And then the third turn is really like well beyond helping others develop the craft as well or teaching them. It is, how do I hand off not just a body of work and a management of the organization and teams, it is how to hand off my entire mindset in order to continue thinking about. It's really almost like a mentorship in some way. The maestro who, develops the future maestro, right? Is somebody who's training the mindset as much as they're training the craft and the, organizational people management too.
Just every time we have a conversation, Mira, I just enjoy it because when you play back, you find a way to kind of advance or clarify the idea. And you've just done that beautifully. I've often said that this work is loving leaders who love leaders. That's that third turn. So now in this third turn, we're preparing the people who will help people to grow and will teach others. So it's about helping them be better mentors, helping them rise to that role where they'll do it. And if we were to move this over to learning theory, we'd be talking about triple loop learning. Single loop, I've mastered specific tabs. Double loop, I'm able to advance this a bit. Triple loop, I'm moving into new learning. And I had a student at one point who said it the best I've ever heard it. He said, I get it now. Single loop learning, I walk out my front door in the morning and I get stung by a bee. I have learned there is a bee. And I can go out my back door tomorrow if that bee is still there. So the next morning I get up, I go out the back door because the bee was there. Single loop. Double loop is that I change my clothing and I go out with protection and I go out my front door. I adjust my whole life to accommodate this reality instead of just, trying to evade it. I'm going to incorporate triple loop learning. I am planning my honey business.
Yes.
And I thought that, that's exaggerated, but that's so much the case. Because when you move in that third place, you're looking at what is coming at us that is full of possibility that we can try. Because what we have now is only going to diminish over time if we only do what we've done.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So then now let's go into quickly. There are 4 key elements that you describe either could make or break a continuity and succession plan or the story behind it. What are those key elements that people should be thinking about if they're listening right now and they're thinking, okay, so how do I do this right? How do I not fall into those ditches?
Let's just be really clear that these 4 elements don't guarantee success. They help reduce loss. They help pave the way towards success, but there are so many factors that are out of our control that, we think we've done it all right, but all it takes is just one incident and it's all unwound. But these 4 elements really help to smooth out a lot of those rough edges. These elements don't have to be in any particular order. So I'm going to start with going back to the leadership theory that we were talking about. If a leader who's been there a long time still can't articulate the why they do things or what matters or how they come to their choices, successors are going to have a hard time unpacking how to proceed from here because it's not written down. They don't even have to agree with that predecessor, but if they don't know, they're just going to trip over invisible suitcases and bark their shins everywhere. Whatever they try, they won't have context. They won't have a reason. So we really want that to get out there. And with AI helping us now, there are a couple of services, and one I really like to recommend, and I'll just say it right now, it's contingency, not within, that's missing the first N. They've got a CEO clone kind of a process that can actually lift out what that philosophy is based upon the data that's fed in and provided. That means the CEO doesn't have to go write. Most CEOs I meet don't enjoy writing. They have to do it all the time. They're always finding a way to truncate it. They're not wanting to wax eloquent about something. So having that at hand, they don't have to hire a professional writer. They can get a really good start of being able to say, this is what I've cared about the most, because they've gleaned it from all of these emails and other files. So that one is simpler to do now than it was even 2 years ago. Another one is, what is the job description when you're moving into this Maestro space? And the job description, whether it's formally produced or not, whether your board asked for it or whether you can't even tell your board yet because a political gamesmanship might break out. So it's still, at the end of the day, a successful succession, a good handoff, making it possible for continuity and succession to happen. So even if nobody else is seeing it yet, even if you can't talk, if you can conceive of it, that's your job. That's what you'll be measured on, no matter what the paper says that you signed on. So we want to get clear about what does that look like? What is the job? How can we get very specific about it? Then there are 2 more that get a little bit more technical and involved. One is the future value balance sheet. And this is one of the ways that continuity and succession come together, because it's not just what capital needs to be in this business 3 years from now for us to keep operating and fulfill our strategy. It's what talent and what kind of resources will we have for that talent? What does this mean for our facilities or equipment or technology? And we don't have all of the answers, but we start laying the track out there before our train can travel on it. Otherwise, it arrives and there's no money, there's no capital, there's no investor, there's no funds to be able to do that next thing. And it becomes this big obstacle. And then the 4th one would be the map. There is no straight line from now to succession. You can't really write it like a Gantt chart. We do this week and that next week, but you can identify the areas that you carry, that you're responsible for, that are going to have to be in somebody else's hands. And I'll use EOS language here. As you put things into people's hands, they need to get it, they need to want it, they need to be able to do it. If they can't do it, don't want to do it, shouldn't be doing it, then they've got no business, being handed these things, because it'll only reduce the value and the capacity of the organization. So having clear plans and all four of those elements, or clear answers to those four elements, starts to set the stage. And when we work at this, we say, okay, it's usually 3 to 5 years to really do this well. Year one, what's that look like? Oh, you end up with 60 pages of information. You get into a second year, it's half that size. By the time folks work this through in a normal kind of change process, they've got 3 slides, 5 points on a slide at most, because they've distilled it down to the elements. You've taken this big mess and you just found that critical path through, and then you can make it happen. And it looks like then it happens so quickly. Well, it didn't happen quickly. It happened because of all that groundwork that was laid, just like a business that takes off well because there was a good business plan.
Yeah. Are you willing to share an example of, anonymized, of course, of, a business that you've seen make this transformation successfully? Like, what did it look like when they started? And what did it look like across time? The way that you describe, like 60 pages down to 3 slides.
Yeah. So in the book, we actually tell some real stories where we had permission to say, here are the examples. And we didn't spend a lot of time looking at the ones where there's all broken up and bad, because they're everywhere. We can find those, just pick up the paper, or, go online and read the news and you'll see a story. So we wanted to show examples across a variety of streams that it can be done. And one that I'll keep it anonymous here, but it's actually told in the book, is a company that was a technology platform for a particular industry. And they had grown organically over time. This leader had taken them from everything being done by paper into it being really a tech hub. So that's a pretty big conversion, and they kept growing. And they arrived at a point where it felt like their top talent was topped out. Like they were able to do what they could do, but any next iteration would require something more. Like they're operating at a regional level, they wanted to go to a national level. That was the next piece. So they did what I was describing earlier. They did a beauty contest, not where they went in front of a lot of investors, but where they put out the invitation for an investor to come according to the criteria they established. Hey, we're competent, we're profitable, we're not looking to be sold. We just think to meet the strategy that's emerging, that we have a dream for, we need some additional capital, and we want someone who wants to come in, have a long-term play, is going to keep our team intact and all that. Otherwise, we're not talking. And that took the better part of a year. They got it done, got a long-term play. In the meantime, the CEO, the longtime CEO, brought in a president from another organization that's in the same space. That person was doing very well. CEO kicked up to be the chair of the board, where he's not even a majority investor, but in that chair role is now facing the larger marketplace and is leading any charge around future mergers and acquisitions. They've done that with 5 different, I think it's 5 now across this last year. They have more than doubled in their employment. They have a very strong track record of folding these organizations in and getting them on board and getting them into the same culture. They are very deliberate about culture, and they are stellar. Nobody does anything perfectly. They've done it as well as I've seen it.
Yeah, that sounds pretty amazing, actually.
It is.
As we're starting to close out a little bit, what is most important to you as a message that you want to share with others who, whether they're close or not even anywhere near thinking about this? And in the context, I'd like to add, in the context of our season, which is rediscovering human needs, I think there's something there behind a lot of what you've been saying.
There's a beloved and young company CEO in my life who makes it a habit to regularly point out that the average human has 4,000 weeks of life. And when you move into the last third of your career, you probably have 2,000 weeks remaining if you live to be 80. And I get choked up sometimes thinking about it, but that speaks to me more than saying you lived X number of days or you have this many hours or this many years. There's something about the week, that cycle, that just, here's another drip through the hourglass of sand, it just plopped it. And there's way less sand at the top than is at the bottom. And I hold a drive to live meaningfully. And what's happening for me, and I can only really speak from what is happening in me, is that with each passing week, I feel a greater determination, not a rush, just a greater determination to live it meaningfully, to not waste anybody's time, to not do something half-baked, to not offer a half-hearted word, to make sure that I am tilted toward encouragement and support rather than repeating my pain or something along that line. I just find that to be so helpful in the work that I'm doing, because now I'm listening to someone who's going to tell me about their dreams and what's meaningful for them while I'm doing what I consider to be my most meaningful work. So here I am, my most meaningful thing I can do, given who I am and how I've lived, talking with someone who's going to tell me what's most precious to them that they'd like to carry forward. That is precious. Something that I would say, this is where then my steward leadership lies. I need to help this person find a way to make that happen so it can continue being a benefit. And one of the ways I often say it, Mira, is that I want my grandchildren's grandchildren to have hope. I have grandchildren. They're now getting almost to their teen years. I can conceive of them becoming adults, living the full life. And so I can see that. And I can remember my grandparents, the stories that they told me before there was such a thing as a car, right? So I live with this like 200-year perspective. And that makes me realize I'm not just an individual. I am an individual, but I am also an embedual. I am embedded in this story that's handed to me and that I will hand to others. And I would like my grandchildren, let alone their grandchildren, be able to say, we have this ancestor that we still talk about because he lived meaningfully and he helped set the stage for what we get to enjoy. But I don't want it just for them. I want it for yours too.
Yeah. Boy, does that resonate for me.
I said, and then I run into my tears, so I can't talk for a moment.
I mean, honestly, that really resonates for me as well. And just spoken like a true leader who cares about making a big impact. So thank you. I'm glad that you're doing this work. And I think, given the outsized, maybe sometimes impact that organizations have on human life in the US, this actually does make a difference, helping other leaders really think about legacy and the future of our grandchildren's grandchildren, right? That kind of stuff. So Thank you for sharing that with me. Folks, you heard what we wanted you to take away, but I'm curious, what did you personally take away from this talk? And more importantly, what is just one small change you can implement this week based on what you learned from Mark? Share it with us on LinkedIn so we could cheer you on. The Hard Skills Show is on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. If today's episode resonated with you, share it with a colleague and leave a review. And the show is sponsored by TowerScope, my leadership and team development consulting firm. If you're looking for more personalized support, leadership, or team coaching, you could also head to gotowerscope.com to schedule a consultation. Thank you for joining me and Dr. Mark L. Vincent today. This is Dr. Mira Brancu signing off. And until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills. Take care, everybody.